Thank you, Mr President. The Greens oppose the higher education and research bill before us. What a saga Minister Pyne has inflicted. I do acknowledge the interjection once again of Senator O'Sullivan. What a saga Minister Pyne has inflicted on the people of Australia. Students, prospective students, their families have been living with months of uncertainty about what their prospects will be at university. Will they be able to afford to go? What is going to happen with the way our universities are managed? And Minister Pyne has just heaped months of uncertainty onto these people. And this is not just because of the destructive aspects of the bill itself. It's also about the way he has conducted this debate. Because let's remember, a bill very similar to the one that we are now debating was decisively defeated last year. In December it was defeated, and immediately the minister, not learning the lessons, not recognising it was time to have real consultations, is back there with a bill not dissimilar to this one back into the House of Representatives yet again. So the minister, by calling himself Mr Fixer and that he's out there bringing solutions, is deceiving nobody but himself and maybe a few others in the Abbott bunker. Because so much of the tactics that we've seen in recent weeks, and particularly what he came up with yesterday, is about trying to safeguard, to quarantine the Abbott government from another embarrassing defeat. But what we're about to see is, in this debate, there will be a number of speakers who set out how clearly damaging this bill is. And I do congratulate many people, the unions, students, staff members, concerned people who are very committed to building a productive, building a higher education system of the highest standard. Many people are out there doing that. And yesterday, while Minister Pyne was doing his backflips, there was many students who were taking action, being very vocal about it. And I particularly wanted to congratulate Kyle Blackney. He's the SRC president of the University of Sydney. With his colleagues, they were protesting at the University of Sydney, engaging in civil disobedience. And those sort of actions are needed because Minister Pyne and the Abbott government have gone too far in what they're trying to do. So last year, as I said, there was a significant win for the tens of thousands of staff, students, education unions, and all those looking forward to a university education, which is their right, when the bill was defeated. And it was an important step because, for a moment, we were safeguarding our universities from the neoliberal policies of this government, which at the end of the day is about heaping the cost burden onto students and their families. That really is the intent of this bill, because we need to remember where the original bill came from. It was a budget measure, pure and simple, to save the government $5 billion. That's what it was ripping $5 billion out of our public universities and putting the cost burden onto students. So what we have here before us now is nothing really new. It's really just back to the old ways of the Liberal National Party with another free market plan. So I think it is relevant to compare the old and the new bills. The new bill has a reduction in the projected savings. The old bill had, as I mentioned, a reduction in projected savings of about $5 billion. What we now have in the bill before us is an estimated saving of about $640 million. Now, some of the key provisions in that original bill remain, and it's important that this is noted because it underlines the very poor tactics that the minister is engaged in. He hasn't fooled anybody when he just brings back basically the same measures for this Senate and the House of Representatives to debate, hoping that he can get his way by trying to embarrass crossbenchers, a bit of intimidation, a bit of blackmail. They're all the tactics that we've seen rolled out. Now, some of the key provisions that remain in this bill—
Point of order, Senator O'Sullivan. Senator O'Sullivan, point of order.
This is a repeat of yesterday with references to blackmail and intimidation. They're directed at the minister. The senator had to withdraw them yesterday, and I recommend that the president seek that she withdraws them today.
Yeah, thank you, Senator O'Sullivan. Senator Rhiannon, could I just ask you to exercise some caution in your contribution in the debate? Senator Rhiannon, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr President. So I was just identifying those provisions that are in this bill that this Senate has already debated in great detail and rejected. This is very relevant. Now, these include cuts to the Commonwealth-supported places by 20%, still in this legislation, and I will come to the comments that the Minister has made on this. The deregulation of course fees, so that universities can charge students whatever fees they want. The lowering of the help repayment threshold, that's the higher education loans program, the increase in the proportion of the loan burden carried by students, and then there is the extension of Commonwealth-supported places to sub-bachelor and bachelor courses at private universities and non-university higher education providers, as well as to sub-bachelor higher education courses at public providers. And then there are actually some real cuts to the research funding in this country in this bill. As we know, again, the minister was highly deceptive about the $150 million that was allocated for those 1,700 scientific workers. We know that's not in the bill, but there are research cuts in the former bill and in this bill, and that's a 10% reduction in the research training scheme program. And then another aspect, similar to both bills, the misnamed Commonwealth scholarships, which are funded from increased fee income, requiring that $1 in $5 be put aside by universities for these scholarships. I mentioned that, the misnamed Commonwealth scholarships, another example of the deception that has become the trademark of this minister. Many people, many of the members here would have benefited from the Commonwealth scholarships, which in their original form was a scholarship where the government put in money that would assist people to go to university. In the current form of Commonwealth scholarships under Minister Pyne, there is no government money that goes into it. It's purely based on getting money off the students who are paying fees and putting it into these so-called Commonwealth scholarships. So that's where the similarity is between those two bills. Now, what we've seen in the couple of months since that bill was originally introduced is that support for the government's position has fallen away. And this is where we need to consider one of those main blocks that the minister has relied on, to make out that he has sector support. How many times have we heard the minister talk about how all the vice-chancellors support him bar one? Now, many of us in here have heard privately from vice-chancellors who hold great disquiet about how the minister is conducting the debate and what is in this legislation, and some of them are on the record. Peter Dawkins, the Vice-Chancellor of the Victoria University, has said that the government should acknowledge that its deregulation plan will not pass the Senate. He's actually talked about a third way. We may not agree with that, but he's certainly not solidly there with the minister as he makes out. And then the Sydney Vice-Chancellor from the University of Technology, Attila Brungs, and the Swinburne University Vice-Chancellor, Linda Christensen, have also questioned how these tactics are playing out. So it's not the solid block that the minister makes out. And it's also that those vice-chancellors are representative of the senior management within their universities. They're not representative of the majority of staff and the majority of students. And I do need to put on the record at this point, it has been disappointing the way many of those vice-chancellors have not represented the whole university sector that they surely lead and should be a representative voice for. And I think that that's done their own universities a disservice as well as the wider sector. So then we come to what we heard about yesterday from the minister with his latest plan. To split the bill, so we deal with deregulation on the one hand and the 20% cut on the other hand. Now, what we need to note right at the beginning is that with regard to the 20% cut, that's the $5 billion that the government was trying to save in the first place and then a reduced amount in the bill before us now. It's only a deferral. It's only a tactic of the minister to try and make out he's listened, that he's changed the legislation. There's no significant change in this at all. It's another deception. It's really a tactic to save the skin of the minister and those in the Abbott bunker. And I say that most definitely because the government looks set that they are about to lose one of the major pieces of the 2014 budget that still has not been passed. $5 billion is not a small amount. They've already watered it down, but they're trying to deal with the whole issue of university funding within their neoliberal philosophy, which is based on putting the costs onto ordinary people, not ensuring that we ensure that the revenue streams are there to pay for this most important part of how our society is organised. So to repeat again, Minister Pyne is not abandoning his 20% cut to universities funding. His proposal is nothing more than to split it off from the deregulation bill for just a 6-month deferral. Fee deregulation, let's remember, will result in significant fee increases, and that is what has been deeply alarming, because there's a wider understanding within the community now that that could mean even higher than the 100,000 price tag that's been linked with the number of degrees in some courses. And that's really troubling many people. That's what's bringing the uncertainty to so many students and family, and has been such a very ugly part of the way the minister has conducted this debate. Now, often when we talk about the quantity in these fees, because the Greens have done a lot of work in this area, I acknowledged that sometimes the criticism comes about our modelling. But our modelling is out there. It hasn't had any significant, no flaws have been identified and put on the table. But when you look at the government, they have not released their modelling and continue to this day refuse to release their modelling, which if they were, if Minister Pyne's comments could be believed, would help give greater insight into how his promises, his commitments would really play out. So again, I repeat, this is a very important part with what we're dealing with here, because the landscape appeared to change yesterday when the minister spoke. But this 20% cut to Commonwealth-supported places would have an extraordinary impact on the budget if the government was sincere. And this is where their credibility again comes into question, because if the 20% cut to CSP funding did not go ahead, the minister's higher education policies, which were meant to contribute to budget repair, would now cost the budget about $1.4 billion. So we've gone from first bill saving $5 billion, second bill saving about $680 million, and then if the minister was successful in carrying forward his plan, it would appear, and I think it would be wise for the minister to come in on this aspect of the debate in his reply to the debate on this bill, and comment on that very fact. Because if you follow through the logic that the minister was putting out there, not that I'm saying the minister was very logical about it, but if you try and carry through his argument, you come to the conclusion that there would be a $1.4 billion cost burden on the budget. Now, surely the government need to come clean with what their plans are. Otherwise, if they don't, like they wouldn't release their modelling, you're left with the clear understanding that this all those manoeuvres yesterday was nothing more than a tactic to try muddy the waters, present that something had changed, to try and get through the bill at the 11th hour, when clearly the degree that they've been discredited is just increasing. Now, we've also heard from the minister a great deal about how this legislation stacks up on the international, not how the legislation, how our universities rank in the international, on the international stage. And often he is quite critical and saying how he wants more universities in the top rankings. Well, as we know, the university system at the moment, yes, it could be improved, yes, it needs more funding, but it isn't this massive failure that the minister makes out. And similarly with our standing internationally. It is not the disaster and it's not as poor as the minister makes out. The data shows that Australia does not have just a few world-class universities, but in fact we have a world-class system. In addition to the 8 universities which make the world's top 200, there are a further 12 universities which make the 200 to 400 group. So again, our universities are not failing. We can be proud of them. Yes, we need to get this debate about the future of higher education onto a proper consultative basis with the wider university sector and the community about the future here and how it's funded in a secure way, not the haphazard and destructive way the minister has conducted himself. But as just staying with some of these issues with international comparisons, I also wanted to deal with the issue of the OECD figures that provide very useful information on the level of tertiary funding. Now, public funding of tertiary education in 2011 in Australia is 0.7% of GDP. Now, this is below the OECD average, which is at 1.1%. So again, this is where we are in a very poor position. We've been below the OECD average for a long time, and that goes to failures both under the previous Labor government and this coalition government, where public investment in higher education is not given the priority it's needed. It's already too low in Australia, and we need to remember it is the responsibility of the government and not students to fix this. Throughout this debate in the wider community, as the government's attempted to bring in legislation, the first round and this second round, there have been many groups that have come to this place to lobby us and to raise their concerns. The National Union of Students, the National Tertiary Education Union, are two of those who have provided very useful information. And the National Union of Students have submitted that the inclusion of $100 million over 3 years for the Structural Adjustment Fund is simply an offset of the government's decision to not extend eligibility for youth allowance and Austudy. And I want to touch on this issue of the Structural Adjustment Fund because that was something else that the government decided to introduce. And I would argue that it really is an admission of failure and highlights the fundamental inequity that is at the heart of this bill. The government came up with this. It's another one of Mr Pyne's attempts to win support for this legislation when he talks about pausing indexation for primary carers of children under the age of 5. Now, clearly that group of people often do suffer considerable discrimination, but again, all we have ended up here with is that it's just up there in lights that this whole way of managing our higher education system is highly discriminatory. The National Tertiary Education Union have also taken up this issue, and they have identified that the SAF was introduced in recognition that deregulation is likely to have a severely adverse impact on regional and rural universities and those serving students that are highly sensitive to the cost of attending university. The change is intended to provide funding to assist providers in a transition to a post-deregulation environment. And that, again, sets out very clearly the problems in so many aspects of this legislation that we have before us. So this is legislation that should not be before this House, where by far the bulk of it has already been considered, has already been voted down. It's again just a very poor attempt by the minister to get his way. And this legislation is destructive both in terms of the impact that it would have on individual students who would be carrying a huge debt burden for much of their lives. Many would never be able to pay it off, but then also destructive of the very fabric of our society. It is no way to run a higher education system, to build an educated, innovative nation by penalising students and their families and pushing the cost burden onto those people, rather than the government accepting its responsibility. You're in government, and part of the key job is to pay for the higher education system. This bill should be defeated. Thank you, Mr Acting President.